Keir Starmer once used to campaign for a return to the EU. He's now well on his way to becoming Prime Minister and has changed his mind. Nevertheless, the Labour leader believes a rapprochement is possible. And that means that the head of the British Labour Party and promising candidate for the post of Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has ruled out his country's return to the EU. "We made the decision to leave the EU so we will not rejoin," said the Social Democrat at a campaign appearance in Southampton last week, Monday. He added, however, that the post-Brexit trade agreement with the EU negotiated by former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was not good enough. "I think many companies would say we need something that works better for us," said Starmer. A better agreement for British companies would be possible, but negotiations are necessary. And Britain could also improve cooperation with Brussels in the areas of defence, security, science and education. Great Britain left the EU and its customs union and single market in 2020, and since then, despite extensive customs exemption controls and documentation requirements have been now in place that make trade more difficult. However, Brussels has repeatedly dampened hopes of fundamental changes to the so-called Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And this applies as long as London does not consider returning to the customs union and internal market, and that would be hard enough. A new parliament will be elected in Great Britain on July 4th, and Labour is on track to win an absolute majority and replace the Conservative government of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. As I said, Starmer once campaigned for Britain to return to the EU. However, he changed his position after the Labour Party's heavy election defeat in 2019. At that time, many traditional Labour voters who supported Brexit defected to the Tories. The election manifestos of the British Labour Party and the Conservatives for the upcoming elections have little reference to the European Union, though. Compared to the 2019 manifestos, the topic of Europe is barely present. Comparing the Labour and Conservative manifestos for 2024 with those of 2019, the issue of Europe is off the table. Labour made fewer references to the UK's relationship with the EU than the Conservatives, and that in both years. In 2019, this made sense as former Prime Minister Boris Johnson was committed to getting Brexit done. And then Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, on the other hand, maintained an ambiguous position on the EU that was out of step with the majority of his party members. In 2024, Labour's silence on Europe is deafening. The UK's relationship with the EU was not mentioned at all by current leader Keir Starmer in his manifesto speech. In contrast, Conservative leader Rishi Sunak made occasional mentions of an intention to gain perceived benefits from Brexit. The Conservative manifesto makes little mention of EU issues, especially compared to 2019. However, there are several references to EU laws that Sunak would like to change. And the opposition Labour manifesto, by contrast, has put the EU almost at the bottom of the agenda. 2.5 paragraphs on page 115 in a chapter entitled Britain Reconnected. This is significant because Sunak claims to be running a continuity campaign while Starmer wants to break with the past. On immigration, the issue that led to Brexit, the Conservatives want to deport irregular migrants to Rwanda in the hope that this will deter future migrants. However, the Labour manifesto describes this plan as a gimmick and that it has already cost hundreds of millions of pounds. Their flagship migration policy is third on the list of 6 top priorities, and they are concerned with establishing a new border security command with hundreds of specialized investigators and using anti-terror powers to break up the criminal boat gangs. Migration policy reveals political differences over international law as well. Sunak said repeatedly at the presentation of his manifesto, "If we are forced to choose between our security and the jurisdiction of a foreign court, including the European Court of Human Rights, we will always choose our security." And this is also stated in the election manifesto. However, the Labour manifesto promises that Britain will remain clearly a member of the European Convention on Human Rights. The Labour Party also wants to remove unnecessary barriers to trade. It hopes for a veterinary agreement to reduce border controls, ensure mutual recognition of professional qualifications, and support our travelling artists, as they put it. Those expecting a renewed commitment from the UK to European integration will be disappointed. The Labour manifesto explicitly states Britain will remain outside the EU, and there is no room for backdoor integration. The manifesto promises no return to the single market, the customs union, or freedom of movement. The Conservatives, for their part, say they are committed to the EU settlement programme and the rights it has guaranteed to EU citizens. Therefore, no further changes are to be expected here. The Conservatives are proud of their record on Ukraine since the Russian invasion in 2022. Boris Johnson was the fifth top politician to visit Kiev following the Russian invasion on February 24th, following the prime ministers of Poland, Slovenia and Czechia, and European Parliament President Roberta Metsola. The UK has often been at the forefront of supplying strategic weapons to Ukraine, ranging from anti-tank missiles early in the war to long-range Storm Shadow missiles later on, making it easier for Western allies to follow suit. Support for Ukraine remains undiminished in the party manifesto, promising to guarantee Ukraine the support it needs in the long term and to reach an international agreement on the use of blocked Russian assets to support Ukraine. The letter is already being pushed, has been pushed at the G7 summit that recently ended. The Labour Party has made a similar statement about its commitment to Ukraine in its manifesto. In addition, they have promised Kiev that if elected, they will play a leading role in paving a clear path for Ukraine to NATO membership. The two parties also largely agree on the issue of defence. Both promise to spend 2.5% of gross domestic product on defence. They also commit to maintaining Trident, that's the United Kingdom's nuclear deterrent. The biggest difference in this area is the Conservatives' proposal to introduce a form of conscription for 18-year-olds by passing a National Service Act. The Labour Party has proposed no such policy. In his campaign speech, Starmer said he was fed up with the politicians lecturing young people about their responsibility to the country, while they, and he means the politicians, take no responsibility for the future. As I said, the UK elections will take place on July 4th, and it will be really interesting to see that outcome. We'll definitely talk about this on this channel. But if you want to see another video right now, the next one is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.